Welcome back to the max difficulty achievement run for Prehistoric DLC. In the first 10 cycles, I was under great food pressure due to not being able to grow my own plant under locavore constraint. I dealt with it by sending my digger duplicant into the teleporter in cycle 5. It's a multi-purpose move, not only to reduce the food burden on home planet, but also to set up for crude oil collection later. As you can see, I am down to 4,000 kilocalories in cycle 11. Since each duplicant requires 2,000 kilocalories per cycle under max difficulty, if I haven't do the teleporter move, my food stockpile would be in deficit already. Good news is that the smoker has finished cooking. I just need to wait for the emptying action to finish to enjoy the veggie poppers. Never mind, Ruby was interrupted by pooping. Can't blame it since I decided to let them live without a wash basin. But lavatory is already under research, and the emptying task should still be finished in this cycle anyway, since it only takes 60 seconds. Although, it's kind of annoying that the emptying required notification is always blocking where the progress bar should be, so I couldn't see it. Or maybe there isn't any progress bar at the first place? Back to Teleporter Planet. Crude oil can already be seen, so it shouldn't take too long to reach it. This planet is kind of small, so this distance is expected. But first, let me drain this polluted water pool so I can build a ladder through it. That's 2 more swamp chard hearts to be collected, and I should have enough vertical ladders for smooth pathing now. There's also Paku down there. Yes, the good old Paku that we are familiar in vanilla. I'm not really expecting a lot from them, since they are much better at making omelets than seafood for carnivore, so I'm not building a dedicated Paku ranch either. But in case I want to randomly feed some of them later, the combined pool size should allow them to reproduce more before being cramped. Starvation warning, huh? Looks like a false alarm. I do have enough food at home, but Ruby is interrupted by pooping needs again. So a temporary starvation warning showed when its calories dropped below 1000. It's also not rare to see these warnings in max difficulty when the duplicants are working in remote areas. Since their full stomach can only hold 2 cycles worth of food, if they ever missed out on one downtime, they will be starving on the next for sure. It's important to track the reproduction progress of the critters, especially lums since they give the most amount of meat. I choose to track their eggs in the Resources tab for this purpose. So the logic is like this. I plan to eat the existing lums and their first offspring. However, when critters are wild, their reproduction rate is hidden. Even if I tame them, it would be tedious to keep clicking in and checking the progress of each lum. The wild ones spawn on the map initially with a random age, so it's not easy to tell from their age either. But now, whenever I see one lum egg on the Resources tab, since all the lums are physically separated, I can click on the egg and immediately knows which lum has just reproduced, without ever monitoring its progress. This means I can safely eat that particular lum without worrying about eating the wrong one. In the last video, I said there are 3 lums and they can all reproduce once, so I can expect to have 6. However, I don't really want to make them go extinct, especially I already feel a little bad about eating these lovely creatures. So I could only afford to eat 5 of them, unless I manage to collect enough Ovagro figs to feed them for extra reproduction. Let's check the stress status for the duplicants. Seems my digger Lindsay is having a moderate stress problem. The morale is high, but since she often steps into water to do digging jobs, the accumulated stress is really noticeable. But now that I checked, there's 2 carpet tiles to the right of the teleporter. That's a nice gift from World Generation, since I can't produce my own carpet tile yet. Stepping or sleeping on carpet tiles would give the duplicant the Tickle Tootsie buff, which removes 15% of stress per cycle. That is really huge for the max stress difficulty. However, if the duplicant is currently having soggy feet or being sopping wet, they cannot get this buff. If Lindsay is still constantly digging into the pools, it won't help her much unless I give her a vacation. To the bottom right, there is the tundra biome, It isn't relevant to me at this stage, except the wild sleet wheat growing there could be made into frost buns. Free food is always welcomed. The wheezewort might be a little problematic since the radiation toleration is cut down to a third on max difficulty. But since there's no big projects at that area, my duplicants shouldn't stay long enough near the worts to cause a real problem. Speaking of free food, I should have enough free food source to take the risk of a fourth dupe. Let us welcome Rowan, and the traits we rolled for Rowan are Tend to machinery. That's too good to be true. Frozen Friends always starts with 3 free skill point, so they are likely to be helpful when making blast shots, which requires pyrotechnic skills. That requires 3 skill point to access. The high machinery stats will also significantly reduce the time and power consumption while crafting blast shots. Normally, the ceiling of starting attribute is 9, so Rowan likely rolled some negative trait to pass the limit. But I would take this duplicant to be a blessing, even if it's flatulent. Well, it's not flatulent anyway. It's just allergies. Now the teleporter planet also got 2 duplicants. Time to finish exploring and collecting the remaining free food. More swamp chards on the top, wheats at the right, grub fruits on the left. The randomly roaming sweetles or even slugs could be an emergency food for carnivore. Speaking of carnivore and locavore, the difficulty actually consists of 3 different phases. First phase, don't starve without growing plants due to locavore. Second phase, set up ranches to produce enough meat in time. Third phase, have the duplicants actually eat enough meat in time. In max difficulty, apparently the first phase is much more harder. The double food consumption and stress issues often makes the run borderline playable and have to rely on mush bars. I was preventing mush bars completely at this run, but if you ever find yourself needing some bars in achievement runs, it's okay to do it as a temporary measure. Just as the game description says, it's better than starving. The second phase is roughly the same in max difficulty, maybe a little bit harder because duplicants are tied up to other imminent projects, but not a different deal. Interestingly, the third phase is actually easier in max difficulty. With only 4 duplicants, they can potentially eat 8,000 kilocalories per cycle, so they can finish the carnivore goal of 400,000 in just 50 cycles. Under normal difficulty, completing with 4 dupe would be nearly impossible, since they have to eat meat for the entire time since cycle 1. It's possible to force them to eat more with a stressed binge eater. That sure make things complicated. So usually, you would need maybe at least 6 to 8 dupe in total to consume all those meat in time successfully. And more dupes, of course, means more oxygen production required. Since difficulty setting doesn't affect oxygen, playing in max difficulty sure has an easier time on this aspect. If we take this further, if you play in the no sweat game mode, which is supposed to make most things easier, it also halves the calories need for duplicants, so that means you will need 16 dupes in no sweat to match the eating speed of 4 dupes in max difficulty. That will actually end up making the run much harder in no sweat. Back to the teleporter planet, I'm also building a smoker here to process the food. The recipes available here would be paku into smoked fish, which produces even more calories compared to cooked seafood in the electric grill. The spindly grub fruit can also be smoked into veggie poppers, which doubles their calories. I hope the long-term wild food can sustain the duplicants here after the initial free food runs out. Although the spindly grub fruit can also be tended by the sweeto critter and transforming into grub fruit. It is a higher quality version of the food, and the cooking recipe for it is completely different. But as far as I can see, the grub fruit doesn't gain a new recipe with the new DLC. So, after being cooked in smoker, the inferior version of spindly grub fruit actually yields much more food than the superior grub fruit. Sounds kind of weird. Am I missing something? My researcher has gained enough experience for the second skill point to access field research skill. So now, it's time to activate the supplied teleporter input so I can send resources from home to the second planet. It's a handy building to transfer resources. Transporting solid materials usually requires conveyor loader and conveyor rail, which requires mechatronics engineering skill. Mechatronics is a very expensive skill, requiring 5 total skill points to access unless a duplicant with a pre-learned skill or using a bionics. Fortunately, the supply teleporter always spawned with pre-built conveyor loader and rails, so we don't have to worry about this. All we need to do is to power up the loader to use. Speaking of the teleporter, it is common to see players disabling teleporter and or care package when they are trying to make a challenge out of the game. A popular choice, but if you are also ever trying to do achievement runs, be aware that there is an achievement called First Teleport of Call, which explicitly requires using a teleporter. So if you disable teleporter, you can't get that achievement. There is a mod that allows you to complete this achievement regardless, and you can use it if you run into this awkward situation. Although I wouldn't personally deliberately choose to deactivate a default setting and then bringing in a mod to retain the right to complete achievement. When Rocket are first introduced in Oxygen Not Included, it sure is a complicated, huge project. However, rockets are made much easier to start in Spaced Out DLC. Once you are familiar with the DLC rocket system, getting to any planet isn't really a big deal. So for me, disabling teleporter is not really making the game harder, more like just dragging the game for longer. Later on, I will sure be launching a lot of rockets to complete the late game space related achievements anyway. And about care packages, I mentioned in the first episode that I will not take advantage of it to survive, but I have to keep it enabled because it's the only way to complete certain achievements. That's because, since the introduction of all the new DLC, it's totally possible for some planet starts to be missing out on some critters or plants. For examples, Badlands on Classic mode of Spaced Out DLC will have no poke shells at all, Blasted Series in the lab map of Frosty Planet Pack have no Dasha salt vines, and Relica Minor, the planet I am currently on, have no hatches, drecos, or bristles. It's unrelated to skill issues at all, there's just absolutely no way of obtaining these other than from care packages. Missing out on these would prevent us from getting achievements like Critter Whisperer, GMO AOK, and Down the Hatch. Cycle 15. Finally, I have researched lavatory as well as the water sieve. Time to set up the bathroom loop, get rid of the outhouses, and get the Royal Flush achievement. I want to do this on Teleporter as well, but somehow I still feel there isn't enough building space for me since I'll have to fit an entire blast shot crafting industry here later. I guess I will just start with one lavatory and split schedules for 2 duplicants to use in different times. At what cycle do you usually build your bathroom? Let us know in the comments. For me, I'm a little indifferent about the lavatory though. It's a nice improvement to have, but not essential at all. Sometimes I do it on cycle 5, sometimes 20, sometimes just never. For example, on some planet starts, I would really want some polluted dirt stockpile, either as an early game rocket oxygen source, or maybe feeding the sea combs to make phyto oil on Relica. But I planned to do the petroleum route on this run instead of Seacomb. Otherwise, I'll stay on Outhouse for much longer to collect the polluted dirt from duplicant waste. Now I just need to kickstart the bathroom loop. We can use either water or polluted water as the initial water supply since water sieve is involved in the loop. The disconnect tool is convenient for cutting and changing the pipe connection for this purpose. It can be accessed with the Shift plus D key combo. We also need somewhere for either the water or polluted water overflow to go, since the bathroom always produces more polluted water output than its water input. I plan to feed the water into a liquid reservoir later, but as a quick workaround, a liquid pipe bridge could guide the water to flow towards it, even if no storage or water-consuming buildings is placed beyond the bridge. My digger just got the second skill point, so time to learn super hard digging and start exploring towards the supply teleporter output and the oil biome. I am trying to contain this random roaming slug within a door, but it escaped. I could try it at nighttime when it stops moving, but there's no guarantee it will be in a desired place to be contained either. I don't have a rancher on this planet yet, so maybe just deal with it later when I can be bothered. Now it's the turn to kickstart the bathroom at home. My lavatory is kind of far from the water pool, so I'll have to make some long piping. It's just to fill the pipe initially, and there will be no need to access the pool after the setup, so no point of trying to fit the bathroom near the water pool anyway. As I am digging down, it's tempting to just dig through the sand tiles on the left to get to the Sweeto packet. But the sand tiles will inevitably fall on the process, and all the wild grub fruit plants would be lost. I do want to free those Sweetos, but I have better just keep these weird sand tiles intact. Finally, got my liquid reservoir to hold the bathroom water overflow. It's still not a permanent solution, but one reservoir is large enough to hold the overflow from 3 duplicants using bathroom for 250 cycles. That's a really handy and practical workaround I would recommend. Meanwhile, I realize I have got my first lum egg somewhere. This is both a good news and a sad news, because it means this lum is ready to be eaten. I guess it might have seen it coming when I included it in my Great Haul. Sorry. Getting the lum egg as early as cycle 17 is kind of lucky, because in their wild form, they have to be over 120 cycles old to lay an egg. However, the initial critters generated on start of a world don't really spawn at age 1, but rather in a randomized age. My Great Hall Lum is over 130 cycles old already, so it's totally legit that it has already laid an egg at this point. I now want to dig to the left of Teleporter, but first I must check if the bottom of the water pool is not made from mud or polluted mud. Mud tiles will collapse and fall down just like sand tiles. If the water pool unexpectedly drained into the polluted water pool down there, it will be a little awkward. Fortunately though, the tiles directly in contact with the bottom of the pool seems to be polluted dirt, so I'll be safe as long as I kept those tiles intact. In Swampy Planet, there's really a lot of terrain to be aware of if we want to prevent an unpleasant surprise. The oxygen overlay in my home planet seems to be a bit thin. It might seem like we have a little oxygen crisis here, but actually, I haven't even entered the first stage of oxygen production, which is oxygen diffuser. We have a lot of algae in Relica, so just get some diffuser running, and things should all be fine. So what I am expecting to find in the teleporter planet is another frozen friend. See this unrevealed room here? That's where the cryopod is. I know the second cryopod exists because I have rolled the frozen friend trait at the teleporter in world generation. The teleporter always start with a guaranteed frozen friend, so by rolling the trait I should get 2 in total. This is gonna be another gamble, but why take a dupe from pod with only 1 free skill point when I can get one with 3? I chose to dig the tiles in this pattern because the concealed room needs to be revealed by unlocking the door with submitting bioscan. And to unlock the door, the duplicant must be standing exactly in this position, not higher, not lower. And now, let us welcome the 5th dupe, which is Ellie. Time for the trait check again. Ellie looks a pretty regular single interest duplicant as a builder. That will be really handy later to build up all the industry for producing blast shots. My home planet still has some unfinished construction plans though, so I will send Ellie the builder back to home for a while. The teleporter has a cooldown of 5 cycles, but that should be sufficient for a moderate amount of dupe relocating. Return teleporter at home planet is still isolated, and Ellie needs to dig her out of the room herself, but the room was generated with oxygen initially, and it was preserved since then. So Ellie should have no problem getting back to safety and meet with the dupes in home. The bathroom at home isn't even finished yet, since I don't have a dedicated builder until now. With Ellie joining us, these should be finished really quickly. On the other hand, the supply teleporter at both planets needs to be activated to use, and I still need to activate them in the second planet. so Pei the researcher will relocate to the second planet. The cooldown of either direction is independent, so it's possible to move one dupe out and one dupe in at the same time. With most preparations ready, and the digger able to dig through abyssalite, it is time to get into the oil biome. Now that I have multiple duplicants here, I will be using the S digging pattern again. It looks a bit concerning to go into the oil biome naked as they are usually hot, but not all of them are that hot. Some oil biome are over 70 degrees Celsius, which could scald a naked dupe, but there are also oil biomes with just 60 or even 50 degrees. Depending on the planet type, a lot of oil biome has magma under it, and the heat could leak if not dealt properly. For Relica miner, the teleporter oil is safe from magma. The actual biome under oil is the barren biome. It has a lot of surprisingly useful materials, such as refined iron. I haven't decided the whole digging pattern and building placement down there yet, but one thing for sure is that I will need wires to supply power and pipes to transport the oil. So it helps to first place the wire and pipe blueprints with an average priority if my dupe ever runs out of things to do. The oil biome also have a lot of lead, which is free refined metals. They can't be used to make blast shots, otherwise it would be too overpowered. But they could still be handy for buildings that requires refined metals such as conductive wires, the blast shot maker itself, or the large discharger which I will use in later cycles. In this actual planet, the top two packets of oil are just 60 something degrees Celsius. The bottommost packet is about 73 degrees, which is just above the scalding threshold of 72. But if I just drain the top two packets and merge them into the bottom one, the combined temperature should be both non-scalding and non-overheating for pumps made from copper ore. This is a time when just simply digging and building a ladder down would do the job. As their activity near the oil biome increases, I want to make sure they have sufficient oxygen and not running back and forth to gasp for air. I have a lot of polluted dirt in this planet, which can be used in the sublimation station to greatly boost their conversion speed to polluted oxygen. Yup, polluted, but this planet is already mostly polluted oxygen anyway. Back to the home planet, it is time to set up a lum ranch for the remaining two lums. After I tame the lums, they might require feeding on the Ovagro figs to prevent starvation and reproduce successfully. If I kept them wild, I could have got the egg for free, but the reproduction rate will be way too slow. If their eggs are produced after cycle 100, then it will be just useless to me as the carnivore deadline has already passed. This really isn't a traditional ranch you would expect. It's just a grooming station, a wild Ovagro node, a pneumatic door, and a fridge. But why a fridge and not a critter feeder? We will talk about that next video.